The city was bustling as usual, the sun high in the sky casting long shadows across the crowded streets. People hurried through their daily routines, unaware of the event that would change everything. Market stalls lined the streets selling fresh produce, clothes, and trinkets from all over the world. The air was thick with the smells of food, the chatter of vendors, and the noise of vehicles weaving between pedestrians. Then, without warning, a loud crack split the air. The sky above seemed to tear open, a glowing rift appearing, stretching across the clouds like a scar. People screamed in panic, some running, others looking up in disbelief. A flash of light blinded them for a moment, and then from the rift someone fell. At first no one knew what it was. A figure, small and fragile, plummeted from the sky, crashing into the crowded marketplace. The crowd gasped, and a few people scattered in all directions. As the dust cleared, the figure lay motionless on the ground, a young girl with shimmering translucent skin, her hair long and flowing like a cascade of silver threads. Her eyes, bright and wide, seemed to reflect the entire universe, and her features unlike anything human had a strange and otherworldly beauty. She lay there naked and confused, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she gasped for breath. Her body was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. A glow, faint but visible, seemed to surround her, making her look almost ethereal. The crowd slowly approached, some cautiously, others with fear. Whispers spread like wildfire. "What is that thing?" someone asked, their voice shaking. "Where did it come from?" A young man no older than 25 stood frozen in place, staring at the fallen girl. He wasn't afraid, though. He had seen strange things in his life. Aliens, strange experiments, the unknown. But nothing like this. His heart raced as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The girl didn't move. She looked so helpless, so vulnerable. The crowd, however, didn't share his concern. A few people sneered, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Throw something at her," one of them called out. "She's not from this world. She doesn't belong here." The first item hit her, a crumpled soda can, bouncing off her skin, with a soft thud. A few more followed, landing near her or grazing her limbs. Laughter erupted from the crowd as people began to throw whatever they could find: wrappers, newspapers, and plastic bottles. Each piece of trash landed with a sound that seemed to echo in the young man's ears. The girl didn't react. She lay there, her eyes wide, but she didn't speak, didn't move to defend herself. She was clearly frightened, but she didn't know what to do. She seemed lost, out of place, unable to understand what was happening to her. The young man's fists clenched. He couldn't stand it. He had seen cruelty before, but this was too much. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing. He knew he had to do something. Without thinking, he stepped forward, brushing past a few onlookers who looked at him as though he were mad. "Stop!" he shouted. His voice rang out, firm and commanding. The crowd didn't listen. Someone threw a bottle of water at the girl, hitting her in the side. The man pushed through the people who had gathered around, his eyes fixed on the girl. He was determined to reach her no matter what. He knelt beside her, blocking the next object that was aimed at her. The crowd paused, confused by his sudden appearance. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice steady but tinged with anger. He looked up at the crowd. "She's not hurting anyone. Stop throwing things at her." A few people exchanged looks, unsure of what to do. Some began muttering, others scoffing, but no one moved forward to challenge him. The young man carefully reached out and, with one hand, lifted the girl into a sitting position. She seemed to flinch at first, but when she saw his face, her wide, frightened eyes locked onto his. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, though he wasn't sure she would understand. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but only let out a soft, confused sound. Her alien features were mesmerizing, yet sad, as if she had been through something unimaginable. The crowd remained silent, watching from a distance. The young man could feel their eyes on him, some filled with curiosity, others with disdain. He didn't care. He turned to face the girl, pulling his jacket from his back and draping it over her shoulders to shield her from the cold air. "You're safe now," he whispered. though he wasn't sure how safe she could be with everyone watching. But for now, at least, she wasn't alone. The alien girl didn't speak, but she seemed to relax a little, her body trembling less. The young man helped her to her feet, supporting her as she tried to stand. She wasn't very strong yet, but she clung to him, her fingers lightly gripping his arm. As they walked away from the crowd, he glanced back. The mocking laughter had stopped, but the silence was heavy, oppressive. People stared, but no one dared to throw anything else. For now, at least, she was safe. And as the young man guided the girl away from the crowd, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter what it took, he would protect her. The young man led the alien girl through the narrow streets, keeping his pace steady so she could follow. The jacket he had draped over her shoulders was too big for her, but it provided some comfort as she clutched it tightly around herself. She looked lost, her eyes scanning the world around her as if everything was strange and unfamiliar. Her fragile form seemed to tremble with every step she took, her glowing skin faintly shimmering under the city's lights. He didn't know where he was taking her, but he knew he couldn't leave her in the middle of the street. People were still watching from their windows, whispering to each other, pointing fingers. He didn't care. He had made a decision. He couldn't turn back now. They walked in silence, the girl occasionally looking up at him with those wide, alien eyes, but she didn't speak. He could feel her fear, uncertainty, and it only made his resolve stronger. He couldn't leave her like the others had done. She didn't deserve to be treated this way. No one did. As they turned a corner, the young man spotted an old, abandoned building. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The door creaked when he pushed it open, and a cloud of dust filled the air. Inside, the place was dark, with only a few rays of moonlight creeping through the broken windows. He stepped in, holding the door for the girl as she hesitated for a moment before following him inside. "Here," he said softly, guiding her to a corner of the room. He didn't know if she understood his words, but he spoke anyway, his voice reassuring. "You can rest here. I'll keep you safe." The girl sat down, her legs trembling as she lowered herself to the ground. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the empty walls and cracked floor. Her hands were still shaking, and she wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to find some comfort in the silence. The young man stepped away for a moment, feeling an overwhelming need to find something for her. He rummaged through the building, searching for anything useful. Water, food, something to make her feel more at ease. He found a dusty old bottle of water in a corner and returned to the girl, holding it out to her. She took it cautiously, her fingers brushing against his for a brief moment. Her eyes met his, and for a second it felt like time stopped. Her gaze was filled with confusion, fear, and something else, something he couldn't quite understand. She brought the bottle to her lips, sipping slowly, her eyes never leaving him. He smiled, trying to ease the tension in the air. "You're safe now," he repeated, though he wasn't sure if she understood. "No one's going to hurt you." But as the words left his mouth, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. He didn't know how to protect her in the long run. The authorities, the government, they would be looking for her, and when they found her, he didn't know what would happen. They might take her away, study her, or worse, lock her up somewhere. He sat down beside her, trying to think of what to do next. There had to be a way to keep her safe, but the more he thought about it, the more complicated it became. She wasn't from this world. He didn't know where she came from, why she was here, or how she had arrived in the first place. Everything about her screamed alien, but that didn't mean she wasn't just as human as he was. She had feelings, emotions. She deserved kindness, not cruelty. "Where did you come from?" he asked, though he didn't expect an answer. She had barely spoken since he found her, and when she did, it was only in a language he didn't understand. But something about the way she looked at him made him believe that she could understand his words. She didn't respond right away, but after a long moment, she looked down at the bottle of water in her hands and shook her head slowly. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign of understanding he had received from her. The young man sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm not sure how to help you, but I'll figure it out," he said, mostly to himself. We'll find a way. He sat in silence, thinking. His mind raced with possibilities, but nothing seemed to make sense. How could he protect her from people who saw her as nothing more than a threat? The authorities, the media. They would be all over her, trying to exploit her for whatever reason they could find. But he wasn't going to let that happen. Not to her. The alien girl finished the water and placed the bottle beside her. She leaned, back against the wall, her eyes closing for a brief moment. He noticed how exhausted she looked, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her fragile shoulders. She had been through so much already, and yet she was still here. Still, fighting to survive. Rest, he said softly, as if speaking to a child. I'll keep watch. She nodded ever so slightly, her body relaxing as she drifted into a light sleep. The young man stayed awake, watching over her. The street outside was quiet, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. They weren't safe here. Not forever. But for now, this was the only place he could protect her, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Even if the world didn't understand her, he would. The young man sat in the dimly lit room, his eyes never leaving the alien girl. She was sleeping, her head resting against the wall, her long hair spread out around her like a soft silver curtain. Her breathing was slow, steady, but there was a quiet tension in her body, as if even in sleep she was waiting for something to happen. The young man knew he couldn't let his guard down. They weren't safe here. Not with the authorities searching for the alien girl. They would be looking for her soon, he was sure of it. He had to figure out what to do, where to go next. He stood up, stretching his legs. He was tired too. But there was no time to rest. He needed to make a plan. The building they were in was small and abandoned, but it was far from secure. People could find them here if they were careless. He needed to think of somewhere safer, somewhere they could stay hidden. His mind raced as he paced the room. Should he take her somewhere far away? A remote place, maybe? Somewhere no one would think to look? Or should he stay in the city and hope the authorities didn't catch on too quickly? He didn't know the answer. The sound of footsteps outside snapped him out of his thoughts. His heart skipped a beat. He froze, listening carefully. They were close. Too close. He couldn't let anyone find them. Not now. Not when the girl needed protection the most. He quickly moved to the window, peeking through the broken glass. A group of people was walking down the street. Some looked like ordinary citizens, others like they might be in a hurry, their eyes scanning the area as if searching for something. The young man's stomach tightened. He couldn't risk it. If they saw the alien girl, they would go straight to the authorities. He turned back to the girl. She was still asleep, her delicate features peaceful, but she had no idea how dangerous their situation was. He wished he could explain it to her, but he didn't even know how to begin. She didn't speak his language, and even if she did, what could he say? He wasn't sure he had the right words to calm her down, to make her understand. All he could do was keep her safe for now. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard the sound of the door creaking open. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively, reaching for the makeshift weapon he had found in the corner, an old pipe. But as the door fully opened, he froze. It was a man, an older man, dressed in worn clothes, his face weathered by time. He had a calm, measured look in his eyes, not the frantic, nervous gaze of someone who would report the alien girl to the authorities. The young man's grip on the pipe loosened slightly. "I know who she is," the older man said, his voice low but steady, "and I know you've been hiding her." The young man didn't say anything. He didn't trust the stranger yet, but he could tell the man wasn't a threat. At least not yet. The older man stepped forward, his eyes glancing toward the girl. "She's not the first alien to land here," he said, almost as if speaking to himself. "There have been others, and they weren't treated kindly." The young man's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The older man hesitated for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "I'm someone who has seen what happens when people like her are treated as enemies. I've been helping those who have nowhere else to go. I've been protecting them." The young man stared at him, still unsure. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," the man replied, his gaze now locking with the young man's. "You're not the first one to care, but you need to understand something." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not just protecting her from people. You're protecting her from a system that will do everything to use her. They won't care about her as a person. They'll see her as a tool." The words hit the young man harder than he expected. He had feared something like this, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. His heart sank. The authorities weren't just looking for the alien girl. They were hunting her. And if they found her, they wouldn't care that she was a living being. She would become just another object in their hands. The older man continued. "She can't stay here for long. You need to move her somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look." "Where?" the young man asked, his voice shaky. The man paused for a moment before answering. "I know a place. It's hidden, far away from here. They won't find her if you take her there." The young man didn't hesitate. "I'll take her. I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." The older man nodded approvingly. "Good. But remember, she's not just a lost alien. She's something far more important. The world doesn't understand it yet, but they will. And when they do, they'll come after her harder than ever." The young man's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what the older man meant, but it didn't matter right now. What mattered was getting the girl to safety. They didn't have much time. He walked over to the girl, gently shaking her shoulder. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him, confused, her expression still a mix of fear and trust. "We're going," he said softly, crouching down beside her. "We have to leave now. It's not safe here anymore." The girl didn't speak, but she nodded slowly, as if she understood. She stood up with his help, her legs unsteady. The young man glanced at the older man one last time. "Thank you," he said before turning to leave. "We'll be careful." The older man watched them go, his expression unreadable. As the young man led the alien girl out of the building, he knew one thing for sure. Their journey was just beginning. The world outside was dangerous, but he would face whatever came next as long as it meant keeping her safe. The road ahead was empty and quiet, with only the faint hum of the wind cutting through the trees. The young man led the alien girl down a narrow dirt path, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. He had no idea where they were going. The place the older man mentioned was far from the city, deep in the countryside. It was supposed to be safe, hidden away from prying eyes. But the young man wasn't sure if safety was even possible anymore. His mind kept racing, his thoughts tangled. The girl beside him didn't speak, though every so often she would glance up at him, her glowing eyes full of curiosity and trust. He wished he could tell her everything was going to be okay, but he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The silence between them was comforting, yet heavy. The world outside seemed so far away now, yet the feeling of being hunted loomed over him like a dark cloud. They had to move quickly. The authorities would be looking for her soon, and if they found them on this road, there would be nowhere left to run. They reached a small clearing after walking for what felt like hours. The young man stopped for a moment, looking around. The dense forest stretched in all directions, but there was something about this place that felt different, almost peaceful. He wasn't sure what the older man had meant by hidden, but this spot seemed like it could be their temporary refuge. "This should be fine for now," the young man said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned to the girl, who was still looking around with wide eyes. She wasn't used to this place, this world, and it made him feel protective in ways he hadn't expected. She wasn't just some lost alien. She was someone who needed him, and he wasn't going to let her down. The girl seemed to sense his unease. She stepped closer to him, her delicate hand brushing against his arm. Her touch was soft, warm, and for a brief moment, he forgot about the dangers waiting for them. He looked down at her, meeting her gaze, and she gave him a small, uncertain smile. He couldn't help but smile back. She wasn't just an alien, She was someone who could still find a sliver of peace in all this chaos. He pulled out a small bundle of supplies he had brought with them, some food, water, and a few blankets. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. The young man didn't know how long they'd have to stay in this secluded spot. Maybe a day, maybe more. He didn't care. All that mattered was keeping the girl safe. She sat down on one of the blankets, folding her legs beneath her. He watched her for a moment, noticing how tired she looked, her body still trembling from the shock of everything that had happened. She hadn't said a word since they left the city, but the young man could see the questions in her eyes. She didn't understand what was happening, and neither did he. "We're safe for now," he said, sitting down beside her. "But we have to keep moving. I don't know how long this place will stay hidden." The girl nodded slowly, her gaze flicking toward the trees, as if she could sense the same danger the young man did. She didn't speak, but he could tell she was listening, understanding in her own way. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a calmness here, in the quiet of the forest, that allowed both of them to breathe a little easier. The young man wasn't sure if he was just imagining it, but it seemed like the girl was beginning to trust him more. She wasn't as stiff, as wary as before. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this mess. But the more he thought about it, the more questions flooded his mind. Where had she come from? What was she really? And why was she here on Earth? She was different from anything he had ever seen, so fragile, so powerful, so alien. But she was also something more. He didn't know how to explain it, but she felt human in some strange way. She had emotions. She was scared, but she was brave too. And that was why he couldn't leave her behind. He glanced over at her again. She was staring at the sky, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. It was almost as if she was waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. He wondered if she knew what was coming. Maybe she did. Maybe she had been through something like this before. The thought made his chest tighten. He couldn't help her if he didn't understand what she had been through. He didn't know if she had a family, if she was running from something, or if she had been sent here for a reason. "I don't know what's happening," the young man said suddenly, more to himself than to the girl. "I don't know what they want from you, but I promise you I'm going to help you. We'll figure it out. We'll make sure you're safe." The girl turned to him, her glowing eyes softening, and for a moment, he thought he saw something like gratitude in them. Or maybe it was just hope that she had found someone who would protect her, someone who wouldn't turn her away. He knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about keeping her hidden. It was about making sure she had a future where she didn't have to live in fear. "We'll be okay," he said, more to reassure himself than anything. But as the wind picked up, rustling the trees around them, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that their time here was running out. The authorities were getting closer. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. They couldn't stay here forever, but for now he would make sure that the girl had peace, even if only for a moment. The young man woke early the next morning, his body stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. The sun had barely risen, and the world around them was still wrapped in a quiet, peaceful haze. He stood up slowly, stretching his arms above his head and looking around. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their leaves rustling softly. It was peaceful, but he knew it wouldn't last long. The alien girl was still asleep, curled up on the blanket. Her soft breathing was the only sound breaking the silence. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable in this world that seemed too harsh for her. He couldn't help but feel responsible for her now. She had no one else, and he wasn't about to let anything happen to her. The thought of the authorities kept him on edge. He didn't know how much time they had before the search reached this part of the countryside. He had to keep moving. He had to find a place where they could be safe. But where could they go? What if the authorities were already tracking them? He couldn't risk waiting much longer. The young man walked over to the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew he had to make a decision soon. They couldn't keep running forever. He had to figure out what to do with her. But as the morning light filtered through the trees, something caught his eye. A figure in the distance, a silhouette, moving slowly through the woods. His heart raced as he crouched down, hiding behind a large tree trunk, trying to remain out of sight. The figure was too far away to make out clearly, but it didn't look like a regular person. The way they moved was different. His mind raced. Could it be someone looking for them? The young man's first instinct was to grab the girl and run, but he knew that would only make them more obvious. They had to stay hidden, at least for now. He crouched lower, watching the figure closely, waiting for any sign that they had been spotted. The figure moved closer, and now he could see more clearly. It was a person, but there was something strange about them. Their posture was too straight, their movements too controlled. The young man's pulse quickened. It was a person, but it didn't feel right. He glanced back at the girl who was still sleeping. The last thing he wanted was to put her in danger, but if they were being hunted, they had to be prepared. The figure came closer, closer still, until finally they stopped just at the edge of the clearing. The young man held his breath, barely, daring to move. He had no idea who this person was or if they were friend or foe. Then, the figure spoke. A soft, steady voice that carried through the still air. "I know you're here. I won't hurt you." The young man froze. The voice didn't sound threatening, but it was still hard to trust. He stayed low, his hand hovering over the makeshift weapon he had with him. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice low and cautious. The figure stepped forward closer, now and into the light. The young man could finally see them clearly. It was another man, older than him, but not much. He looked rugged, worn, as though he had been living in the wilderness for a long time. His clothes were simple, practical, and he carried no weapons, but there was something about him that seemed different. "I'm not your enemy," the man said, his eyes meeting the young man's. "But I know who you are, and I know who she is." The young man's heart skipped a beat. "You know her?" he asked, his voice a little louder now. He didn't know if he should trust this stranger, but something about his calm, steady manner made him hesitate before running. The man nodded. "I know about her, and I know they're looking for her." The young man's chest tightened. He didn't know what to think. "Who are you?" he repeated. "My name's Marcus," the man said simply. "I've been helping people like her, people from other worlds." He paused, looking at the girl sleeping behind the young man. "I've seen them before, and I know the danger she's in." The young man's mind raced. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything," Marcus replied. "I'm here to help, to protect her." He glanced at the girl again, his expression softening. "I've seen what happens when they find someone like her. They take them, study them, lock them away. But I won't let that happen." The young man felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was mixed with doubt. He had no reason to trust this stranger, but at the same time, he knew he couldn't do this alone. He couldn't protect the girl by himself, not against the forces that would be hunting them both. "I'm not sure what to do," the young man admitted, his voice quieter now. "I don't know where to go, how to keep her safe." Marcus stepped closer, offering a reassuring smile. "I can help you. I've been in the same position before. There's a place, a safe place. They won't find her there. But we need to leave soon. The longer we wait, the more danger you're in." The young man glanced back at the girl, still sleeping peacefully. He couldn't let anything happen to her. He had to protect her, and if this stranger could help, he was willing to trust him. "Okay," the young man said finally. "Show me." Marcus nodded, his expression serious now. "We'll leave in the morning, it's not far, but we have to move quickly." The young man felt a sense of relief, but also unease. He didn't know if this was the right decision, but for the first time since he had found the alien girl, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they could be safe. The morning came quickly, and with it, a sense of urgency that the young man couldn't shake. The world around them was still quiet, the forest wrapped in a calm that only seemed to heighten the tension. Marcus had led them a little further, into the woods, just beyond the small clearing where they had stayed the night. The young man had spent most of the night awake, listening for any sounds, any signs of danger. The alien girl had slept soundly beside him, unaware of the looming threats. But the young man knew they couldn't stay there. They had to move, and they had to move fast. Every minute they spent waiting was another minute that the authorities could be getting closer. "We leave now," Marcus said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled around them. He didn't need to say more. The urgency was clear in his tone, and the young man knew what had to be done. The girl was awake now, sitting up on the blanket, looking around with a quiet curiosity. She hadn't spoken yet, but he could see the questions in her eyes. She was starting to trust him more, and that gave him a sense of relief. He couldn't imagine how frightened she must feel, having no idea what was going on, where she was, or what would happen next. Marcus had already packed up his things, ready to move out. He had a look of quiet determination on his face. The young man grabbed their few belongings, taking one last look at the place that had given them some peace. As they walked through the woods, the alien girl moved closer to him, her soft glow still faint, but visible in the early light. Her hand brushed his arm, a simple gesture that seemed to communicate more than words ever could. He smiled at her, trying to reassure her, though he wasn't sure how much reassurance he could offer. Marcus led the way, keeping a steady pace, through the dense forest. The young man followed closely behind, keeping the girl protected between them. They moved in silence, each step bringing them further from the place they had called their temporary refuge. "There's a town up ahead," Marcus said after a while, breaking the silence. "We'll stop there for supplies. We need to keep a low profile. No one can know we're here." The young man nodded, though the thought of being in a town made him uneasy. People were unpredictable. Some would help, but others might turn them in to the authorities. He wasn't sure who he could trust anymore. As they neared the town, Marcus signaled for them to stay close. They stuck to the edge of the woods, moving quietly as they approached the small settlement. It was a quiet place with a few houses scattered along the main road. The people here didn't seem to notice the three of them walking through the outskirts, but the young man kept his eyes sharp, watching for any sign of trouble. They reached a small convenience store, its windows dusty and its sign faded from years of neglect. Marcus motioned for them to stay outside, then went in alone. The young man felt a pang of worry, but he knew it was necessary. They couldn't risk drawing attention by all entering at once. Minutes passed before Marcus returned, carrying a small bag of supplies. He handed it to the young man, who took it without question. Inside were a few cans of food, some bottled, water, and a couple of other essentials. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get them through the next part of their journey. "We'll stay hidden in the woods for a while," Marcus said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if to make sure they hadn't been followed. "But we'll keep moving at night. During the day we stay low. They won't find us if we're careful." The young man looked at the alien girl, who was still watching them with those wide, unblinking eyes. She hadn't said a word, but he could see her processing everything around her. Her presence was calming in a way, but the weight of the situation was still heavy. They couldn't stay in hiding forever. They needed a plan. As they began walking again, the young man's mind wandered to the questions he hadn't yet asked. What was the alien girl's past? Where had she come from, and why was she here? He couldn't help but feel that there was more to her story, more than she had been able to communicate. He glanced over at Marcus, who seemed to sense his thoughts. "She's from a distant place," Marcus said, his voice low. "A place far from Earth. But that's all I can tell you for now. The rest you'll have to ask her yourself when she's ready." The young man nodded, though the answer didn't satisfy him. He wanted to know more. He needed to understand. But for now, all he could do was focus on keeping her safe. The hours passed as they moved deeper into the woods, staying off the main roads and out of sight. Nightfall came quickly, and the darkness settled around them like a heavy blanket. The young man felt a sense of comfort in the night. At least they weren't visible to anyone passing by. But as the night wore on, his anxiety only grew. "What's the next step?" he asked Marcus, his voice quiet but filled with determination. Marcus stopped, turning to look at him. "We move west," he said. "There's a place there, a safe house. We'll be safe there, at least for a while, but we need to keep our wits about us. We can't let our guard down." The young man felt a knot in his stomach. They couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, they would have to face what was coming. But for now, he focused on the present, one step at a time. As they continued walking through the woods, the alien girl stayed close to him, her hand brushing his again. He could feel her trust, even without words, and in that moment he knew that no matter how hard things got, he would protect her. He had to. The night had grown colder as they made their way through the dense forest. The trees, thick with leaves, loomed above them like dark sentinels. The sounds of the woods filled the air, the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl. The young man's breath came in short, quick puffs, the cold air biting at his skin. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of their journey was pressing down on him more with each passing minute. Beside him, the alien girl walked silently, her eyes scanning the dark surroundings. Her delicate hand occasionally brushed against his arm, a soft reassurance that she was still there. He hadn't said much since they left the small town, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He didn't know how much longer they could keep running. Every place they went to felt temporary, a hiding spot that couldn't protect them forever. He couldn't shake the feeling that the authorities were always one step behind, closing in on them. Marcus, who had been leading the way, stopped abruptly. The young man nearly bumped into him, his mind momentarily distracted by his own thoughts. Marcus raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. The young man's heart skipped a beat. What was it? Was someone following them? Marcus turned to face them, his expression serious. "We're almost there," he said, his voice low. "Stay close. There's a safe house not far from here, but we have to be careful. We don't want anyone seeing us." The young man nodded, trying to ignore the growing anxiety in his chest. They had been moving for hours, and though he was tired, the idea of reaching safety filled him with a fragile sense of hope. They couldn't stay out in the open any longer. They needed to get inside where they could rest, plan, and figure out what to do next. As they continued, the moonlight filtering through the trees grew fainter, and the path became narrower. The forest around them was dense, almost suffocating. Every crack of a twig or snap of a branch sounded louder than it should. The young man's nerves were on edge, his every instinct screaming to stay alert. He had never been in this kind of situation before. He had always been an ordinary guy, someone who lived a simple life. But now, everything had changed. He wasn't just protecting the alien girl anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something he didn't fully understand yet. The girl beside him was still so quiet, so distant in some ways. She hadn't said a word since Marcus had started talking. It worried him, but at the same time he understood. She had been through so much, and words probably didn't offer much comfort to her right now. She had been thrust into this world, without warning, without a chance to understand what was happening, and yet, through all of it, she had shown strength. Suddenly Marcus stopped again, this time with a look of urgency. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll check the area." The young man nodded, his eyes following Marcus, as he moved off into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. He felt a wave of unease wash over him. This wasn't the first time Marcus had gone off to check things, but something about this felt different. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. He glanced at the alien girl who was standing beside him, still clutching his sleeve. Her eyes were wide, as if she could sense the tension in the air. "Do you think we're safe here?" he asked softly, though he wasn't sure she understood. The girl didn't respond. She just stood there, her gaze focused on the dark woods around them. He could feel her unease even though she didn't show it. It was clear that she too knew something wasn't right. A few moments later, Marcus emerged from the shadows, his face grim. He motioned for them to follow him, and the young man didn't hesitate. They quickly moved forward, keeping close to the trees. Marcus led them to a small cabin hidden in the woods. It was old and worn, but it looked secure enough. "We'll rest here for the night," Marcus said, turning to the young man. "But we can't stay long. We'll need to move again soon." The young man nodded, though his mind was still racing. He had no idea what was coming next. But for the first time in days, he felt a small measure of relief. They were safe for now, at least. Inside the cabin, it was warm, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. There were no windows, only a small light hanging from the ceiling. The young man and the alien girl sat down on the floor, leaning against the walls. Marcus began sorting through the supplies he had brought with him: food, water, and some basic first aid items. He looked over at the young man, his expression serious. "We can't keep running forever," he said quietly. "Eventually they'll find us. We have to be ready for that." The young man looked at him, his stomach sinking. He had known it was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus paused, looking down at the supplies in front of him. "We fight back," he said simply. "We find a way to fight back." The young man didn't know how to respond. He had never been in a fight, never had to defend himself against anything more dangerous than a bad day at work. But now, it seemed like that wasn't enough anymore. He had to protect the alien girl, and he had to protect himself. The girl beside him looked up at him, her eyes calm but full of understanding. She didn't need words to know what was happening. She had been through worse, and he could see the quiet strength in her. "We'll make it through this," the young man whispered to her, though he wasn't sure if it was for her or for himself. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm, a silent promise that they weren't alone. The young man took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The road would be hard, and they might not make it through unscathed. But he had made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it. He would protect her, no matter what.